Karen tried to film me, stealing. I was protecting her from a real threat. Living in the Willow Creek estates, you get used to a certain type. We all know them. The ones who seem to have a permanent furrow in their brow, a mental checklist of neighborhood infractions, and a phone perpetually at the ready to document any perceived slight against their personal sense of order. In our little corner of suburbia, that type was embodied perfectly by Karen Henderson. Now, I'm not one for gossip, but Karen, well, her reputation preceded her. You'd hear whispers at the community mailbox, hushed conversations during the Saturday morning farmers market. Did you see what Karen said to Mrs. Davison about her petunias? Apparently, Karen sent another email to the HOA about the height of Mr. Chen's lawn. Oh, and don't even get her started on kids playing too loudly after 6. Karen was, to put it mildly, invested in maintaining what she considered the pristine standards of Willow Creek. And anyone who deviated, in her eyes, was a target. My interactions with Karen had been minimal, thankfully. A strained smile here, a curt nod there. I tend to keep to myself, my days filled with my work as a software developer, the quiet hum of my computer a more soothing soundtrack than the neighborhood drama Karen seemed to thrive on. My little cottage-style house, with its slightly overgrown rose bushes and the bird feeder I diligently kept stocked, was my sanctuary. I wasn't breaking any HOA rules as far as I knew, and I made a conscious effort to be a good neighbor, even if that neighbor was Karen. But lately, I'd noticed something off. It started subtly, almost a gut feeling. There was a new face around Willow Creek, a man who didn't quite fit the usual demographic of manicured lawns and sensible SUVs. He was a bit shifty looking, always seemed to be lingering near people, striking up overly friendly conversations that seemed to end with him asking for some kind of help. He was smooth, practiced, and something about his eyes just didn't sit right with me. My internal alarm bells, usually pretty reliable, were ringing softly but persistently, and he seemed to be focusing his attention on Karen. I'd seen them talking near her meticulously maintained flower beds, him leaning in close, gesturing with his hands, Karen listening with a strange mix of suspicion and something else. Maybe a hint of being flattered by the attention? It was hard to tell with Karen. Another time, I saw him near her car in the grocery store parking lot, pointing at something on her tire, his demeanor overly helpful. Karen had looked wary but had engaged with him nonetheless. My concern grew. This guy had con artist written all over him, and Karen, with her somewhat trusting nature, when it came to authority figures and smooth talkers anyway, seemed like an easy mark. I started keeping an eye out, not wanting to be nosy like Karen, but genuinely worried about her well-being. One particularly sunny Tuesday, I was walking my dog, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix I'd rescued a few years back. We were strolling past the community center when I saw them again, Karen and the shifty guy. He was showing her something on his phone, his face animated, and Karen was nodding, her expression softening. He even put a hand on her arm, a gesture that seemed a little too familiar for a casual acquaintance. My instincts screamed. This was going somewhere bad. I decided I needed to intervene, but subtly. Karen wouldn't take kindly to a direct warning from me, the quiet neighbor who kept to himself. She'd probably accuse me of being paranoid or, worse, of having some ulterior motive. So I hatched a plan, a clumsy one maybe, but the best I could come up with on short notice. As I walked Buster closer, I pretended to trip, stumbling slightly and letting out a loud, exaggerated whoops. Buster, ever the opportunist, started barking excitedly. The commotion drew their attention. Karen turned, her brow immediately furrowing at the sight of me. The shifty guy also looked over, his smooth smile faltering for a split second before he recovered. "Everything all right there?" Karen asked, her tone more accusatory than concerned. "Yeah, just a bit clumsy today," I said, forcing a chuckle and giving Buster a playful tug on his leash. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I tried to sound casual, hoping to disrupt their interaction. The shifty guy's attention seemed to shift to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. He said something quietly to Karen, and she turned back to him, a renewed look of suspicion on her face as she glanced back at me. Their conversation seemed to have been derailed, at least momentarily. I continued my walk, my gaze lingering on them. The guy seemed a bit put off by my interruption, his earlier charm replaced by a more guarded demeanor. Karen, however, seemed more focused on me, her eyes following me with a distinct air of distrust. Over the next few days, I continued my subtle surveillance, trying to keep the shifty guy away from Karen without making it obvious. If I saw them talking, I'd find a reason to be nearby, watering my lawn a little longer than usual, checking my mailbox multiple times a day. Each time, Karen would eye me with increasing suspicion, her lips often moving as if she were muttering something under her breath. I knew I was walking a fine line. My attempts to protect her were clearly being misinterpreted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was in danger, even if she couldn't see it herself. And knowing Karen, if I tried to directly warn her, she'd likely accuse me of being the one up to no good. The irony wasn't lost on me. The neighborhood busybody, completely oblivious to a potential threat right under her nose, while the quiet neighbor was trying to intervene, only to become the object of her suspicion. The stage was set for a classic HOA-Karen confrontation, one where good intentions would likely be twisted into accusations and where the real danger remained unseen by the very person it threatened. My clumsy attempts at deflecting the shifty guy's attention from Karen had backfired spectacularly. Instead of subtly steering her away from a potential con, I had inadvertently painted myself as the suspicious character in our little suburban drama. Karen's wary glances escalated into outright glares. If I happened to be near her, she'd clutch her purse tighter or pointedly lock her car doors. The whispers I used to hear about her now felt like they might include me as the latest subject of her neighborhood scrutiny. The shifty guy, whose name I'd finally overheard someone call Rick, didn't seem entirely deterred by my presence, but he was definitely more cautious. He'd still approach Karen, but he'd keep a closer eye on me, his earlier smooth demeanor replaced by a guarded watchfulness. It was like a bizarre, silent standoff, with Karen unknowingly in the middle, misinterpreting the whole situation. One afternoon, I was tending to my overly enthusiastic rose bushes, pruning away some dead blooms, when Karen emerged from her house, her small dog, Princess Fluffy Butt III. Yes, that was actually her dog's name. I'd overheard it once, yapping at her heels. As she walked towards her mailbox, she stopped abruptly when she saw me. Her arms crossed, her lips pursed. The full Hua Karen look was in effect. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to prune roses all on its own. I straightened up, clipping shears in hand, trying to look as innocuous as possible. "Just tending to my roses, Karen. They're a bit unruly this year." "Don't think I haven't noticed you lurking around," she continued, her eyes narrowed, "always popping up whenever I'm talking to people." She emphasized the word people with a distinct air of suspicion. "Lurking?" I asked, trying to keep the exasperation out of my voice. "I live here, Karen. I have things to do around my own property." "Oh, I'm sure you do," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But it's awfully coincidental, isn't it? Every time Rick is around, there you are." Rick. So she knew his name. That didn't make me feel any better. "Karen, I don't know what you think is going on, but I assure you I'm not lurking." I decided to try a slightly more direct approach, albeit still carefully worded. I've noticed some people around the neighborhood who seem a little less than trustworthy." Karen scoffed. "Trustworthy? Rick is a very nice man. He's been so helpful." "Helpful how?" I wanted to ask, but I knew it would just escalate the situation. "Helpful," I repeated neutrally. "Well, I'm glad you've had a positive experience." "Unlike my experience with you," she shot back. "Honestly, you're behaving very strangely. It's making me uncomfortable." Uncomfortable? She was making me uncomfortable with her unfounded accusations. "Karen, my only intention is to be a good neighbor," I said, trying a different tack. "If my presence has made you uneasy, I apologize. It wasn't my intent." She didn't look convinced. "I'm watching you," she said, her eyes still narrowed. "And if I see you doing anything suspicious, I won't hesitate to call the authorities." With that, she turned and marched towards her mailbox, Princess Fluffy Butt yapping indignantly at her heels. That was it. I was officially on Karen Henderson's radar. My attempts at subtle protection had completely backfired, turning me into the neighborhood pariah in her eyes. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. The person who might actually be trying to take advantage of her was being welcomed with open arms, while I, the concerned neighbor, was being threatened with police intervention. Over the next few weeks, the situation escalated. Karen's suspicion of me grew into outright paranoia. If I was outside at the same time as her, she'd often pull out her phone, pointedly aiming the camera in my direction. I even caught her muttering to herself once, something about documenting the evidence. Evidence of what? Me watering my lawn? Me walking my dog? Rick, meanwhile, continued his interactions with Karen. I saw him helping her carry groceries, chatting with her by her car, even sitting on her porch with her one afternoon. Whatever he was doing, Karen seemed to be falling for it. My anxiety about her well-being intensified, but my ability to intervene without looking like a complete lunatic was rapidly diminishing. One Saturday, the Willow Creek Estates held its annual neighborhood barbecue in the community park. It was usually a fairly low-key affair, a chance for everyone to socialize and pretend to get along. I debated whether or not to even go, knowing that Karen would likely be there, her accusatory gaze following my every move. But I figured avoiding it would only make me look more suspicious in her eyes. As expected, Karen was there, holding court with a small group of neighbors. Princess Fluffybutt nestled in a designer carrier beside her. When I walked by, I could feel her eyes on me, and I even caught a snippet of her conversation. And he's always around when that nice Rick is visiting. I sighed inwardly and tried to blend into the background, chatting with some of the friendlier residents. But it was like having a persistent buzzing fly around my head. Every time I looked up, Karen seemed to be watching me, her phone sometimes subtly pointed in my direction. Then I saw it. Rick had pulled Karen aside, and they were standing near a quieter corner of the park. He was talking intently, his voice low and persuasive, and Karen looked troubled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, official-looking document. My alarm bells went off again, louder this time. This looked like the ask. The moment the con artist tries to get their mark to hand over money or personal information. I knew I had to do something, and subtlety was clearly out the window. I started walking towards them, trying to look casual but with a sense of purpose. Just as I got within earshot, Rick said, "Just need a little help to get this sorted out, Karen. A small investment, and you'll see a fantastic return." He gestured to the document in his hand. Karen looked hesitant. "I don't know, Rick." That was my cue. "Excuse me, Karen," I said, my voice deliberately loud enough to interrupt. "Have you seen Mrs. Gable's prize-winning zucchini this year? It's enormous." Karen turned, her expression a mixture of annoyance at the interruption and a flicker of something else. Maybe a subconscious awareness that something wasn't quite right. Rick's smooth smile faltered again, replaced by a look of irritation. "We were having a private conversation," Karen said sharply. "Oh, sorry," I said, trying to look contrite. "Just thought you might be interested in the zucchini. It's really quite something." I lingered for a moment, my presence clearly disrupting Rick's pitch. He tried to steer the conversation back to his investment opportunity, but the moment had been broken. Karen seemed less engaged, her gaze flicking between Rick and me with a newfound uncertainty. Finally, Rick, sensing his opportunity slipping away, made an excuse and walked off, shooting me a look that could curdle milk. Karen turned to me, her arms crossed, her suspicion reignited. "What was that all about?" "Just admiring the zucchini," I said innocently. "It's really quite impressive this year." She didn't look convinced. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? You're deliberately trying to interfere with my friendships." "Ikari." "Friendships?" I repeated, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yes, Rick is a friend, and you're being incredibly rude." "Karen," I said, taking a deep breath, deciding to risk a more direct warning, "consequences be damned. I don't think Rick is who he says he is. Please be careful." Karen's face hardened. "How dare you? You don't know anything about Rick. He's a much better neighbor than you are, always lurking around and making me feel uncomfortable." And then she did it. She pulled out her phone, her finger hovering over the record button. "I'm documenting this," she announced, her voice trembling with indignation. "Your harassment of me is going to stop." Harassment? I was trying to protect her. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. I just stared at her, the phone pointed squarely at my face, the bright sunlight glinting off the lens. This was the climax of our conflict, the moment where my good intentions were twisted into malicious accusations, all while the real threat continued to circle, unseen and unacknowledged by the very person in danger. The bright lens of Karen's phone felt like a malevolent eye, accusing me of some unseen crime. My frustration reached a boiling point. Here I was, having gone out of my way, albeit clumsily, to protect her from a guy who screamed scam, and she was treating me like I was the neighborhood menace. The irony was so potent it was almost comical, if the situation weren't so infuriating. Karen, I said, my voice tight with exasperation, I am not harassing you. I am concerned. That man, Rick, I don't trust him. There's something about him that doesn't feel right. Oh, I'm sure you think so, she sneered, her finger still poised over the record button. Mr. Perfect, always watching everyone, judging everyone. Well, I'm watching you now, and if you so much as look at me the wrong way, this video is going straight to the HOA and the police. I just shook my head, defeated. There was no reasoning with her when she was in full HOA Karen mode. Her preconceived notions and her self-righteous indignation were impenetrable. I turned to walk away, the image of Rick's oily smile and the official-looking document still nagging at me. Karen was making a huge mistake, and I felt powerless to stop it. The neighborhood barbecue continued, but the festive atmosphere had been soured for me. I kept a wary eye on Karen and, more importantly, on Rick, who had reappeared, his earlier irritation seemingly forgotten as he resumed his charm offensive with Karen. This time, however, there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He seemed more insistent, his gestures more urgent. Karen, in turn, looked more conflicted, her earlier defensiveness towards me seemingly replaced by a troubled contemplation. I watched from a distance as Rick led Karen away from the main gathering, towards a quieter corner of the park near the woods. My gut clenched. This was it, the final act of the con. He was isolating her. I knew I had to intervene again, but this time I needed to be more direct. Consequences be damned. I started walking towards them, my pace quickening. Just as I was about to call out to Karen, I saw it. Rick reached into his pocket, not for the official-looking document this time, but for something smaller, something glinting in the sunlight. It looked like a small knife. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a con anymore. This was something far more dangerous. My protective instincts kicked into overdrive, the earlier frustration with Karen evaporating in a surge of adrenaline. Karen! I yelled, my voice cutting through the afternoon air. Watch out! Karen and Rick both turned, startled. Rick's smooth facade crumbled, replaced by a look of cold fury. He quickly concealed the object in his hand. What's going on? Karen asked, her eyes wide with confusion and a hint of fear. Karen, you need to get away from him, I said urgently, my gaze fixed on Rick. I saw something. He's not who he says he is. Rick took a step towards Karen, his voice dangerously smooth. Don't listen to him, Karen. He's just trying to cause trouble. But something had shifted in Karen's eyes. My sudden panicked warning, coupled with Rick's reaction, seemed to have finally pierced through her denial. She took a small step back, away from him. That was all the opening Rick needed. His eyes narrowed, and he lunged. Not at Karen, but at me. He moved with a speed that surprised me, the glint of metal flashing in his hand again. Years of being a relatively non-confrontational software developer didn't exactly equip me for hand-to-hand combat with a potential assailant. I reacted instinctively, throwing my arms up to defend myself. The small knife grazed my forearm, a sharp, stinging pain. The commotion erupted. Neighbors who had been enjoying the barbecue stared in shock. Karen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Call the police, I yelled, trying to create distance between myself and Rick, who was now advancing on me again, his face contorted with rage. Suddenly, Karen, the woman who had been so quick to accuse me, the woman who had been filming me just moments ago, acted. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed a nearby picnic basket, a heavy wicker thing filled with someone's potato salad and watermelon, and swung it with surprising force, connecting squarely with the back of Rick's head. He stumbled, momentarily stunned. That was the opening I needed. I tackled him, using my weight to bring him down. We wrestled on the grass, a chaotic tangle of limbs. He was stronger than he looked, but the element of surprise and Karen's unexpected intervention gave me a crucial advantage. "Get off him!" Karen yelled, her voice surprisingly forceful. She stood over us, the picnic basket still clutched in her hands, looking more like a surprisingly effective weapon than a vessel for coleslaw. By this point, several other neighbors had rushed over, their initial shock replaced by a sense of alarm. Two of the burly dads from down the street helped to subdue Rick until the police, who had been called by multiple frantic residents, arrived. The scene was surreal. The idyllic neighborhood barbecue, now the backdrop for a minor brawl, and the arrest of a con artist who had apparently escalated to violence when his scheme was threatened. And in the middle of it all was Karen, looking bewildered but strangely vindicated. The police took Rick into custody, his protests and denials falling on deaf ears. They took my statement, and several neighbors corroborated my account of Rick's suspicious behavior and Karen's interactions with him. Even Karen, looking pale and shaken, admitted that Rick's investment opportunity had started to feel wrong. As the police led Rick away, Karen turned to me, her usual accusatory glare replaced by a look I had never seen before, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and gratitude. Are you okay?" she asked, her voice surprisingly soft. She gestured to my bleeding arm. I looked down at the shallow cut. "It's just a scratch. I'll live." The realization seemed to dawn on her, slowly but surely. The man I had been lurking around, the man I had tried to warn her about, had just attacked me. And she, the one who had been so quick to judge and accuse, had inadvertently played a crucial role in stopping him. You were trying to protect me, weren't you?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. The weight of her misjudgment seemed to be crashing down on her. I just nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The drama of the past few weeks had finally reached its chaotic climax. The HOA Karen had finally encountered a real threat, and in doing so, had been forced to confront her own flawed judgment of the person who had tried to help her all along. The irony was still there, thick as ever, but now it was tinged with a sense of unexpected resolution. The barbecue was definitely over. The aftermath of Rick's arrest was interesting. The neighborhood buzzed with the news. It turned out that Rick had a history of similar scams in other communities. Several neighbors admitted they had felt uneasy around him but hadn't wanted to interfere. Karen, however, became the unexpected center of attention. The woman who had unwittingly found herself in a dangerous situation and had, surprisingly, played a part in stopping the perpetrator. The biggest change, however, was in Karen's demeanor towards me. The suspicion and accusations vanished, replaced by a hesitant sort of respect. She even approached me a few days later, her usual rigid posture softened, her voice uncharacteristically sheepish. "Alex," she said, avoiding eye contact, I wanted to thank you for what you did at the barbecue and for, trying to, well, before." "You're welcome, Karen," I said, keeping my tone neutral. The memory of her filming me, her accusations ringing in my ears, was still fresh. I was wrong about you," she continued, finally meeting my gaze. There was a genuine look of remorse in her eyes. I let my assumptions get the better of me. You were trying to help, and I treated you terribly." "It's okay, Karen," I said, though a part of me still felt a bit bruised by her earlier behavior. "The important thing is that you're safe." She nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. I realize that now, and I'm grateful." Over the next few weeks, Karen's transformation was subtle but noticeable. She was less quick to judge, less prone to jumping to conclusions. I even saw her having a polite conversation with Mrs. Davison about her petunias, without a hint of criticism. It was like the near danger had shaken her out of her HOA Karen persona, forcing her to see the world and her neighbors in a different light. She had been so busy looking for perceived infractions that she had completely missed the real threat. And it was the person she had mistrusted who had ultimately had her back. Our interactions remained somewhat formal, but there was a newfound layer of respect between us. She even offered to bake me a casserole once, a gesture so out of character that I almost refused, but I accepted. a small sign that perhaps, just perhaps, the HOA Karen of Willow Creek Estates was finally starting to thaw. The silence after the storm in Willow Creek Estates was remarkable. Rick had been arrested and charged, turning out to be a seasoned con artist with a string of similar scams in other communities. The initial flurry of news subsided, replaced by hushed conversations among neighbors, many of whom admitted they'd felt uneasy about Rick but hadn't wanted to interfere. Karen, surprisingly, became something of a local figure. From the neighborhood busybody, she transformed into the near victim, and her unexpected wielding of the picnic basket was recounted with a mixture of amusement and admiration. The biggest change, however, was in Karen herself. In the aftermath, Karen was quieter. The perpetual furrow in her brow seemed to have smoothed out, and she was noticeably less prone to nitpicking neighborhood minutiae. I even witnessed her having a polite conversation with Mrs. Davison about her petunias, a scene I wouldn't have believed possible just weeks prior. As for me, the graze on my arm healed quickly, but the memory of the tension and Karen's suspicion lingered. While I felt a sense of relief that Karen was safe, I couldn't entirely shake the sting of her quick judgment. A few days after Rick's arrest, Karen approached my house again. This time, Princess Fluffy Butt was absent, and Karen's demeanor was uncharacteristically subdued. She stood on my porch looking slightly nervous. "Alex," she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, I wanted to thank you again. For everything." I nodded. "You're welcome, Karen. I'm just glad everything turned out okay." "No," she shook her head. "I mean, before too. You were trying to warn me about Rick, and I was awful to you." The remorse in her voice seemed genuine. "I'm sorry," she continued, looking down at her feet. "I got so used to being suspicious of everyone. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. You were trying to help, and I treated you terribly." I sighed. "I understand, Karen, but the important thing is that you realize it now." "I do," she said, looking up at me, "and I'm grateful. You acted bravely, and you were right. I almost—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. After that conversation, the dynamic between Karen and me began to shift, albeit slowly. She didn't suddenly become my best friend, but the suspicion and hostility were gone. In their place was a hesitant sort of respect, a quiet acknowledgement of her misjudgment and my unexpected kindness. I started noticing small changes in Karen's behavior around the neighborhood. She was less quick to jump to conclusions, less inclined to interfere in other people's business. I even saw her helping Mr. Chen carry groceries from his car one afternoon. She complimented my roses. These small actions spoke volumes about a significant internal shift. A few weeks later, the HOA held a community meeting. I usually avoided these gatherings, but this time, I decided to attend. Karen was there, and she did something that surprised everyone. She stood up and publicly apologized to me for her accusations and her poor treatment. She admitted that her suspicion and judgmental nature had blinded her to the truth and to my genuine concern. Karen's apology caused a ripple of murmurs through the room. Many residents were accustomed to the critical, often sharp-tongued Karen, but her words seemed sincere, and the act itself was a significant departure from her usual behavior. In the aftermath of the meeting, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates seemed to lighten. Neighbors were friendlier, more open with one another. The incident with Rick had served as a strange sort of wake-up call, reminding everyone of the dangers of preconceived notions and the importance of trusting and helping each other. As for Karen, she continued her transformation. She became involved in community activities, offering assistance to elderly neighbors, even volunteering to organize a neighborhood watch program. The HOA Karen of Willow Creek seemed to be genuinely blossoming into someone else entirely, a flower of empathy and kindness. My interactions with Karen remained somewhat formal, but there was a newfound layer of respect between us. We'd occasionally chat, and I no longer felt the weight of her suspicious gaze whenever I was near. Looking back, I realized that the incident with Rick, as dangerous as it was, had been a necessary catalyst. It had forced Karen to confront her own flaws and to open herself up to a different way of seeing the world and her neighbors. Willow Creek Estates ultimately became a more connected community where suspicion and judgment gave way to trust and compassion. And it was all thanks to a slick con artist and a hawkerin who, in the face of real danger and a dose of unexpected karma, finally learned a valuable lesson about kindness and understanding, a lesson I, the quiet neighbor, had inadvertently helped her discover.